Hey everybody, it's D from D&D Ditches, and today the D stands for delays. The holiday season is almost upon us, and with that comes delays with the mail. Some of my packages have literally been stuck at customs for 2 months. I'm buying books, not drugs, although it makes me happy just the same. Let's dive in and I'll show you all the narcotics that I got in the mail this month. Once again, we have another package from Noble Knight Games. Let's see what they sent me this month. So the first item that we're going to have a look at today is the Mystara campaign box set, Glantri Kingdom of Magic. This is part of the Mystara campaign setting, which is the default campaign setting for most of the basic Dungeons & Dragons line, which includes BX and BECMI. I've never owned any of the Mystara products, so this is going to be the first Mystara product that I own. However, the Mystara setting is what introduced me to Dungeons & Dragons. Back in the mid-90s, there were two D&D beat-them-up arcade games called The Tower of Doom and Shadow over Mystara, and they were my favorite arcade games when I was in high school. Used to waste a lot of money after school on the weekends on them. Those games were set in the Mystara setting, and I believe in one of those games you do end up visiting the Kingdom of Glantri at one point. This box set was released in 1995, and I believe it's released after the Mystara box set called the Duchy of Karamakos. And as I mentioned before, Mystara is the default setting of the basic D&D lines, so I don't really understand why TSR released Mystara for Advanced 2nd Edition. The Mystara campaign setting is a bit of a kitchen sink setting, as they kept throwing mini settings under this Mystara umbrella, so it included Hollow World, Known World, Savage Coast, and I believe Blackmoor was also retconned into Mystara. Couple of things that I've noticed about the Mystara setting. First of all, a lot of their products tend to have really nice cover artwork. This one in particular, I've always loved this illustration because it really captures the moment where the action meets the fantasy. And the other thing that I've also noticed is that a lot of its products also came with an audio CD. I've mentioned in some of my other videos that back in the mid-90s, TSR released a string of products which included an audio CD, as they designed a product with a multimedia focus, as they're supplying an audio medium on top of the visual medium, which is already included as part of the product. In this case, you're getting a really immersive experience as you have maps, handouts, character cards with artwork, a lore book, the adventure book, and you're also getting some music and sound, voices and dialogue. So this was their strategy in marketing these products by targeting multiple senses. So the back of the box tells you what's included in this package. We have an audio CD role-playing aid with realistic sound effects and character voices for your game sessions. The Test of Darkness, a 32-page adventure that takes heroes from the fabulous Great School of Magic to unknown perils. The adventure is compatible with the AD&D game rules in the First Quest audio CD game and in the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master Guides. So First Quest was a box set released during the 2nd edition era, which is essentially their version of the starter kit. It came with a mini Player's Handbook, a mini Dungeon Master's Guide, a mini Monster Manual, a lot of visual aids, and also an audio CD. It pretty much does the same thing as a 5th edition starter kit. It's supposed to introduce new players to Dungeons & Dragons and a way to ease them in. We have the 128-page Grimoire Your Visitor's Guide to this Sorcerer's Land, featuring beautiful color art plus all new wizard kits and spells, full color poster-sized maps of the realm and its capital Glantri City, 10-player handouts including adventure maps, illustrations and props, 6 sheets of additional mini adventures of the Dungeon Master, and 8 full-color hero cards. And it says it's suitable for all levels of play. So let's take a look at the miscellaneous goodies. These are the pre-generated character cards. We have a few more hiding in the back here. There are 8 pre-generated characters. We have Padris de Grand, the Elven Thief Wizard. These are his stats, and on the back, we're given a brief backstory as well as his character abilities. We have his known spells as well as his thieving abilities. Zakharol Dunn, the Human Wizard. Ambresha Bremier, the Human Wizard. Bradriel Wordlord, the Elven Fighter Wizard. Jaladarum, the Human Wizard. Alicia Maffei, the Human Thief. Thanos Dantigen, the Human Wizard. And Heras Dalvio, the Human Fighter. A lot of wizards in this lineup, which makes sense because Glantri is supposed to be the Kingdom of Magic. And this is the map of Glantri City. The city itself is shown with all of the buildings being mapped out. The different districts are color-coded. And then we have some close-up on the Tower of Size and some artwork on a typical building. There are some typical marketing material which came with every single box set, subscriptions to the Dungeon magazine, and join the RPGA network. The second map shows the area surrounding Glantri. So Glantri City is over here, and it shows you the different roads and how it connects to the other cities, other landmarks and different terrains. It is presented like a hex map, so you can use it for overland travel hex crawling. And then we're left with some other material. These are the handout sheets that you can use to assist with running the game. Now they are single-sided. They typically depict floor plans or other maps of dungeons. And then we have some travel journals. I would say that these are probably the journals that you would find in the game itself. And these are really nice tools that you can use to get your players really invested in the role playing and immersed in the game. And then we have 6 sheets which contain mini adventures that you can throw into the game as additional quests and missions that you can send your players on. So we have the rat problem for player levels between 3 and 5. You cannot call yourself a proper role-playing game if you don't have a quest about solving the rat problem. The dust of the crater. A wizard's back is always turned. Temple takeover. For love not money. And the Tomb of Vath Ignol. These adventures are double-sided and already includes the monster stats, and also has a neat little map. So just reading through this one briefly, this is designed for experience levels between 10 and 12, and the setup goes that the heroes hear about the magical treasure trove of Vath Ignol, a long-dead wizard buried beneath his ruined tower. This is a mini dungeon crawl for the heroes to explore so they can get their hands on some powerful magical items, and the villains are also trying to get their hands on these powerful items as well, so it's in the player's best interest to get them before the villain does. They could be fun side quests that the DM can hand out in between story missions. They're not super detailed because the expectation was that it's the DM's job to expand on them and incorporate them into your game. Let's have a look at the Grimoire. This is the lore book, and it sets out to give you an overview of Glantri, the different principalities, the city districts, and the Great School of Magic. And then it goes into magic and Glantri and character options. So firstly, the overview. And that looks like the different countries of Mystara. Glantri is over here, and the Kingdom of Karamakos, which I mentioned is the other box set, is located over here. The history of Glantri. Some artwork of the currency. And chapter 2 moves into the different principalities. Artwork for some of the rulers and the nobles. And then chapter 3, waterways and wizards. And this is the part where it details the different districts of the city. As we looked at the map before, all the different districts are color coded. And we have the Great School of Magic. And the next chapter covers magic. As the city has a school of magic, you would expect that there will be some new spells. This dude here looks like Gale from Baldur's Gate 3. And then we move on to magical items, as well as known artifacts. And this section talks about the 7 secret crafts, which are the secret magical societies. For example, there is the secret craft of alchemy, and then the secret craft of cryptomancy, not to be confused with cryptocurrency, dracology, necromancy, and then it talks about a new type of spell called the Radiance. I've not read this section completely, so I don't really know how it works, but it talks about it here that spells of the Radiance exist outside normal wizard spell schools. And then we have some Radiance wizard spells. And then we finish off the book with the Glantri and character options, which is really only 5 pages long. But we have 2 new wizard kits. We have the Glantri Wizard and the Glantri Military Wizard. And now let's take a look at the Test of Darkness. This is the introductory adventure set in Glantri, and then the introduction tells you how to use the CD. So when you get to a section where it gives you the track number, it states that encounters with the soundtrack on the CD include a special icon and track note like this. For example, at the start of the adventure, it asks you to play track 1. The sound of people milling about the street is accented by the resonating bell chiming the hour in the distance. So I would expect when you play track 1, this would be the ambient sounds of people milling about the street, bells chiming in the distance. So it's really there to set the scene and foster the immersion. So the adventure is set in this magical school during the entrance exams. So I just remind you again, this was released in 1995. It was before Harry Potter, it was before Strixhaven. It has a lot of audio and visual aid. The scenario is very reminiscent of the hijinks that you would get up to in a magical school. You've got the menagerie, you've got some dungeon crawl thrown in there for good measure. You know, this adventure actually looks really fun. I like the artwork, I like the setting, I love the idea that this is a magical school. I feel like this is more of a sensible take on the idea of magical school over the fantastical take that Strixhaven went with. So if you looked into Strixhaven and you feel unsatisfied, well, maybe give Glantri a try. And this is the CD itself. And it lists on the back the other CD adventures. We've got introductions to the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons game, which I believe is included in the first quest box set that I just mentioned. We have Karameiko's, the other Mystara box set, Mystara Night of the Vampire adventure, Mystara Hail the Heroes adventure, AD&D Red Steel campaign setting, and then Track of the Werewolf and Track of the Vampire. I don't actually know what the final 2 items are about. I don't know if they're actually Dungeons & Dragons adventures. And we're not quite done with Mystara just yet. The next box set that we have is called Mark of Amber, also set in the Mystara setting. So it says it's an audio CD game featuring a 64-page adventure book, player's poster map, 8 parchment sheets, and 1 audio CD. So I recognize this piece of artwork, as this artwork appeared in the 2E revised black label, either the Dungeon Master Guide or the Player's Handbook. I can't actually remember which because I own both of them. But I remember seeing this piece of artwork in that book and I was like, wow, this looks amazing. These red robed figures, you can't really see their faces. You can't tell whether they're good or evil, but there's just so much mystique with this piece of artwork. So I've always been drawn to this product, even though I knew nothing about it. So this box set was also released in 1995. There is the adventure booklet. And this is the poster map. We have the ground floor and the second floor. These are the floor plans of Maison Salé Chateau d'Amberville. Some of you guys who've played through a classic first edition adventure might actually recognize that name. Because if we look at the blurb on the back of the box, Mark of Amber is a sequel to the popular adventure Castle Ember. This story is set 30 years after the original adventure. I didn't even know that connection until this point. So I know a little bit about Castle Ember, I've never run it obviously. So I own the Goodman Games' original adventure reincarnated version of Castle Ember, where it was updated for the 5th edition. So originally this was published as X2 Castle Ember, also known as Chateau d'Amberville. So I believe in the original adventure it was kind of like a horror-esque type of situation, and if I recall correctly it's almost like a Domain of Dread Ravenloft type of situation, as the adventure was horror themed. So let's have a look at the handouts. We have a timeline of the events covering the previous adventure and the timeline until today. And on the back we have the d'Amberville family tree. And there are quite a lot of journal entries, clearly meant to be discovered by the players as you go through this module. And then we have a summary of what's contained in the CD. Some of these are music, for example, the Amber theme instrumental. Some of these seems to be voice acted lines or dialogue. For example, Ariette the May tells the PCs that all the d'Amberville are mad. And there is a score sheet. Seems like when you go through the adventure, you would earn points based on the actions that you've taken. And based on the score you earn, you get a different outcome. And then we have some additional maps of the dungeon and also the chateau, and a timetable which dictates the NPC's actions. So this reminds me a little bit of the Ravenloft adventure called Castle Forlorn. Seems like it's the same kind of idea that you're inside a mansion, and at certain times on certain days certain things will happen, and I would imagine it's up to the PCs to solve the mystery. This adventure is designed for 2 to 6 players between 4 to 6 level. So it starts off describing the different rooms of the mansion, and the numbers given relates to the key that's on the poster map. So how this adventure seems to be written is that part 1 includes all of the different places and what is in each room. And when you move on to part 2 lists all the different events that could happen during this adventure. Premise of the adventure seems to be that the players gets invited to dinner at a mansion, and then obviously mishaps happen, hilarity ensues, yada yada yada, the typical D&D shenanigans. And this adventure unfolds over the span of 4 days or so, and during this time there's going to be murders that happen, and depends on what the party does, that's going to impact the final outcome of the adventure. The book then goes into detailing the different NPCs of the adventure. So I don't know much about this adventure or the previous one, but to anybody who enjoyed the previous Castle Ember and wants a follow-up to that story, well, now you know that Mark of Ember is the sequel adventure to Castle Ember. And on the back it lists other audio CD games, which are different to the ones listed on the back of the Glantri box. Glantri Kingdom of Magic gets a mention, as well as Planescape A Player's Primer to the Outlands, Ravenloft A Light in the Belfry, and Red Steel Savage Baronies. Let's move on to the next book, which is called Guide to Hell. This was released in 1999, so we all know that my favorite setting of all time is Planescape, and TSR as a company was going bankrupt, so Wizards of the Coast bought them out, and the buyout was finalized in either 98 or 99, and one of the first things that they did was that they cancelled several of the settings, including Planescape, as the last Planescape books were released in 1998. But in publishing, books don't write themselves overnight. A lot of these books would have been planned and written months in advance. I believe that some of these books were still in the work. So in 1999, they released several of these what I call not Planescape books. There are 5 of them that I can think off the top of my head. Guide to Hell, A Paladin in Hell, Warriors of Heaven, Vortex of Madness, and Die Vecna Die could have all been Planescape products because they were all planar materials. So Wizards of the Coast looked at the books and said, well, Planescape don't sell. So I have no confirmation or any of this, but I reckon if they did have any leftover unpublished Planescape material, they would have just published them as the 2E Black Label generic product. So this book, Guide to Hell, is exactly what it says on the cover. It is 64 pages long and serves as a lore expansion to the 9 Hells of Beator, which is the lawful evil outer plane. So the 9 Hells of Beator was already covered in the Planes of Lore box set, and in that video I had a big complaint on the Beator section, which was the lore that they gave for a lot of the major players of the Hells were really vague and quickly became out of date thanks to this book. As you can see, the artwork in this book is pretty generic. It doesn't measure up to any of Tony DiTerlizzi's artwork, however, the lore provided in this book is several rungs above the previous box set. So far, this book has already given new lore on the ancient history of the planes. There are some new character options with new character kits. And for chapter 4, the book is now diving into the 9 separate layers of Hell. And this is an updated diagram of how the different layers fit together. A lot of the descriptions of the different layers and different locales that you can visit in each layer are repeated from previous Planescape products. For example, for Avernus, we have Darkspire, the Maggot Pit, Tiamat's lair. All of that was covered in much more detail in prior products, as all 3 of these locations were visited in the Adventure Files of Dis, and you're only given a single paragraph per each of these places that you can visit, so it does not make the previous products obsolete. And each layer barely gets a single page. Flagathos and Stygia gets half a page each, so for a lot of the locations I would still go back to the Planes of Lore and any of the other previous products. But when it comes to lore, I would take the updated information from this book, at least as far as 2nd edition is concerned. So the problem with the Planes of Lore box set was that for layers 7 and 8, we were given pseudonyms as the names of the lords of each layer. For example, for layer 7 Meladomini, the lord of the layer is Archduke Beelzebul, aka Triel the Fallen. Triel the Fallen was the name that was given in Planes of Lore. The same with Cania, the lord is Mephistopheles, aka Baron Molocroth. And we have some expanded lore of these rulers. And then we move on to Nessus, which is the 9th layer. And the Lord of Nessus and the Lord of Hell is Asmodeus. In the previous product, Lord of the Ninth was actually shrouded in secrecy, and nobody knows his identity and his name, which makes absolutely no sense, because the whole shtick with the Beatazu's devils is that they're trying to get more mortals to worship them. And everybody knows the name of Asmodeus these days. He's as powerful as a god now. Why would somebody that wants to ascend to the status of a god keep their name and their identity a secret? The whole thing with the Outer Planes is that belief is power, so the more worshippers that you have, the more powerful that you get. It makes absolutely no sense for a mortal to go, I worship the highest ranking Lord of Devils, whatever his name is. On the planes, if you want to be powerful, you need to be famous. If you want to be famous, well, you better get your name out there. Chapter 5 gives you a lot more backstory about the Lords of the Nine. Back in 2nd edition, the Lord of Avernus was Bel the Pit Fiend, although if you read up on Bel, his story and that of Zariel gets quite intertwined. Zariel gets mentioned quite a bit here. When I run a game which features Avernus and the Devils, I would always use Bel. I find his story is way more interesting than Zariel. And then it goes on to the Dark Eight. So the Dark Eight and the Lord of the Nine are not the same, and their duty is mostly overseeing the Blood War. And then we get a huge amount of write-up on Asmodeus. And then we move on to chapter 6, which talks about the different types of campaigns that you can use utilizing the Hells. One other thing that I noticed that I haven't mentioned yet, now that Wizards of the Coast have taken over, they're now actually calling them Devils. Although Beatazu has been retained, and that is the name that they call themselves, and Devil is the name that other races, mostly mortals, call them. Towards the end, it talks about how the different magic functions in the 9 Hells of Beator and how cleric magic is affected. All of these are piggybacking off of Planescape rules. And then we have the Denizens of Hell, the different types of Beatazu, they're still called Beatazu here, along with the Talizi's artwork from Planescape. Next one that we have is the Forgotten Realms supplement called Elminster's Ecologies Appendix 1, The Battle of Bones and Hill of Lost Souls. This was released in 1995. In one of my unboxing videos a couple of months ago, I did the Elminster's Ecologies box set, which I'll link it here for you if you haven't seen it. And in the original Elminster's Ecologies box set, there were 9 little booklets, and it covered, I think, 8 different regions of Faerun, as it went through the ecology of the flora and the fauna in each of the region, both the mundane and the supernatural monstrous kind, and it provided some local gossip or folktale that the DM can use as hook or inspiration to create their own adventures. So Appendix 1 adds 2 additional 32-page booklets, which covers the Battle of the Bones and the Hill of the Lost Souls regions, and then an 8-page supplement which includes the random encounter tables for these 2 new regions. So there was also a subsequent product that was released called Elminster's Ecologies Appendix 2, which has a similar kind of format, but I don't actually own that product just yet. One day I'm going to get my grubby little hands on it, and it will be featured in one of my unboxing videos, and that is your cue to subscribe. So this is the Battle of the Bones book, which starts by detailing the land, the temperature, the seasons, and what you'll find on the site itself. We're given the map for this part of the land, which is right on the edge of the Anarok Desert. So just looking at the headlines of this book, seems like it's mostly undead, which inhabits this region. This is a new site called the Rose Garden. Comparing this to the original box, I can tell that there's significantly less artwork. Seems like there's not much of an art budget for this book. And as I mentioned before, it goes through the different types of undead. And some of the more powerful ones, specters, vampires, liches, ghosts. Undead monsters are extremely scary in 2nd edition due to level drain. Tell you what, if I see a specter, I'll be running the other way. And the last page on the back, we have the rumors and legends. This part of Faerun seems to be a good place to run your game if you want to feature a lot of undead. Although just with a general flip through, it feels like the quality doesn't quite measure up to the original box set, as we had, what, 3 or 4 pieces of artwork on this one. The second book is for the Hill of Lost Souls. So the write-up is talking about orcs, some of the hidden monsters, the lava unkag. Sounds nasty. There are some lizard-type creatures, and we finally have a map. I would have expected the map of the region that it's covering, but we have what looks like a treasure map, and this is a sample map of the 5 Newt tunnels, Thalan's tomb, and the mysterious geyser. These seems to be new places that you can visit. One thing that I noticed about this product, which is also consistent with the previous box set, is that the format of the books are not consistent, and that's because these booklets are written by different authors. For example, in the Battle of the Bones, it started off with talking about the lay of the land, whereas in the Hill of Lost Souls, that section is in the middle of the book. And here we have an example of some dangerous flora. I think D&D concentrates a little bit too much on the fauna, so I do appreciate that the flora gets a lot more coverage. And speaking of flora, we have killer grass. These little guys look quite cartoony. And this is what I mean about the format being different. We have the map of the region right at the back, whereas in the Battle of the Bones, the map is at the front. The Hill of Lost Souls and the Battle of the Bones are within proximity with each other, so it makes sense to bundle these up together in the same product. And we're robbed of something that could potentially be on the back. Come on people, use your space wisely. So let's take a look at the encounter tables. There's some artwork in this book. I'm pretty sure all of these are recycled. This piece is from the Greyhawk supplement called the Marklands, which I've done an unboxing video on last month, and this piece is from the Ravenloft adventure Night of the Walking Dead. Next up, we have A Guide to Transylvania. While this book has the Ravenloft logo, it is actually a supplement for Mask of the Red Death, which is a Gothic Earth setting. So it's kind of like a sub-setting within Ravenloft. This book was published in 1996. There's a tacky sticker on the back that I'm too scared to remove. I don't want to damage the book. The Mask of the Red Death setting takes place in a fantasy version of our Earth during the 1890s. TSR released a box set for this campaign setting, and there were 2 supplements released for Mask of Red Death. So we have A Guide to Transylvania, as well as a book called Gothic Earth Gazetteer, which I have looked at in my unboxing video a couple of months ago. So this book is 96 pages. We have a map of Transylvania and a map for the Ottoman Empire from the 1800s. The book then goes on to introduce Transylvania. What's so special about this place that a D&D book has to be written for it? So if you didn't know, Transylvania is the area that spawned Dracula. So this goes into the horror trope about Transylvania. The novel Dracula, the stories about vampires, a lot of horror tropes come from this part of Europe. So the book starts with talking about the history of this area, going back to the early recorded history. Now I don't know how much of this is based on history and how much of it is fantasy, but this is the section where it introduces Vlad Dracul. So with my very limited knowledge on the subject, I believe the novel Dracula is based on the real life person named Vlad the Impaler. I have watched a couple of YouTube videos on this subject during COVID, so if you're interested, I'm sure you can find more answer on YouTube. But as far as this book is concerned, it gives you an exposition of his life, and it says here from this time onward he was known by a new name, Vlad Tepes or Vlad the Impaler. So the timeline's still in the 1400s, and then through the 17 and 1800s until we arrive at present-day Transylvania, which is 1890. So next chapter talks about the physical conditions of Transylvania at this point. Transportation time, currency, climate, the topography, flora and fauna, the various cities and historical sites. We have a few city maps. It's designed so that you can use in your own game. And then some maps over the greater region. And next chapter talks about the people of Transylvania and from the surrounding lands. And then the language is supposed to give it a bit more of an Eastern European type of flavor. Some names that's appropriate for the era and the area. The typical art, songs and dance, music. Weddings, festivals and holidays. And then folklore and superstition. This is probably part of the book that is of the most interest to players and DMs, given that you're probably choosing to play in this setting for a reason. And a lot of it has got to do with folklore, monsters, other supernatural things, vampires. And then it gives you some NPCs to use with your game. Without reading too much into these, it seems like a lot of these NPCs could be seen as something akin to the Dark Lords of Ravenloft. For example, we have a werewolf over here. It's likely that they're developed to be more of a villain or an antagonist to your story. And then of course, Dracula himself. He would be someone that's more like a real life version of Strahd. And then of course, we also have Van Helsing, the real life monster hunter and the real life version of Van Richten. And then the book ends with some new cabals or secret societies. And then there's one new monster entry called the Dhampir, which has become a lot more prolific in D&D in recent years. And then we have some more maps on the Transylvanian Alps, including one where it features the Orient Express. So you can take the train from Paris to Transylvania. Speaking of Van Richten, we have Van Richten's Guide to Fiends and Van Richten's Guide to the Vistani. So both of these are Ravenloft supplements, and is a series of monster ecology books for the different types of creatures and people within the domains of dread. So there were a series of 8 of these that were released with the red borders. We have 2 right here. And what were the other 6? Well, I'm glad you asked. The other Van Richten's guides were vampires, ghosts, the ancient dead also known as mummies, the created also known as flesh golems, the lich, and werebeasts. So that's all 8 of them all up. What happened at a later stage when Wizards of the Coast bought TSR, they released all 8 of these in 3 volumes of the Van Richten's Guide compendiums, and they added a 9th guide which was for witches, focusing mostly on the hags. So apart from the fact that the compendiums fetch for extreme prices on eBay, I actually prefer the original red bordered books better because it contained a lot more artwork that was appropriate for the subject matter. So both of these books were released in 1995 and are 96 pages each. Let's have a look at the guide for Fiends first of all. On the cover is a Merilith, which is a demon also known as a Tanari. Anybody who's played Final Fantasy should also recognize her. As I alluded to in the previous book, Dr. Van Richten is the Ravenloft version of Van Helsing. He is a herbalist by day, and he has devoted his life to hunting down vampires and other monsters. So he has written these in-universe books on how to hunt these type of monsters. So the first chapter talks about entering the land. As you may or may not know, Ravenloft is also known as the Domains of Dread, and during 2nd edition it was located in the Deep Ethereal Plane. The other thing about Ravenloft is that it's really easy to get in, you just have to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, but it's almost impossible to get out. This table shows the effect of the transposition process for the different types of fiends. So Ba'at Hazu are also known as devils, Tanari are the demons, Yugoloths were called daemons back in 1st edition, however in 5th edition they retained the name Yugoloth, and Garaleth are the Demodans. So the idea of the transposition process is that a fiend will start corrupting the mind and souls of a mortal, presumably from outside of Ravenloft, and the more the mortal gets corrupted, the more powers that they receive. And these are some of the examples of the powers that they receive. There are 5 stages of this process, and as you reach stage 5, the mortal and the fiend will trade places. And the bad news for both of them is that the mortal will now be stuck in one of the lower planes, and the fiend is now stuck in Ravenloft, unable to leave. And another way for the fiend to get in is via summoning. Then we move on to the fiendish powers. The Van Richten's guys tend to start off with the typical powers that these creatures have, and then move on to the unusual or atypical powers that are normally not associated with these types of monsters. And because all the different types of fiends are so diverse, the book covers a wide range of different powers, and then we have ethos-based powers which are powered by belief, and it talks about the source of the power. As these fiends are connected to the lower planes, they generally have affinity with evil. So a lot of their powers might be fueled by evil. But then the book also talks about lawful fiends such as the devils and the chaotic fiends such as the demons, and the different types of powers that they could be imbued with. So the aim of these Van Richten's books is to help the DM create unique and memorable antagonists and monsters. So it really encourages you to mix up their powers and their weaknesses and ideas on how to invent new ones. The book then goes on to talk about reality wrinkles, which tends to be a fiendish specialty in Ravenloft. So within the lore of Ravenloft, there is a very prolific fiend. I won't say their name because it may be a bit of a spoiler. And this fiend travels all around the domains of dread, planting the seed and setting up a string of events for some kind of grandiose plan that they have. However, outside of 1 or 2 highly prolific fiends, Ravenloft doesn't actually have a lot of them. Ravenloft likes to stick to its gothic horror tropes. You've got the undead like vampires and mummies. You have the werewolves, the flesh golems, the hags, the witches. So this chapter talks about the relationship between the fiends and the mortals, such as wheeling and dealing bargains, possessions, temptations. And then we move on to some fiendish NPCs, and this section is only 3 pages long. Like I said earlier, Ravenloft don't have a lot of fiends. And I don't see the prolific fiend that I was thinking of in these pages either, so I would imagine that their existence is not really common knowledge. Then we get onto the section about battling the fiends, and this looks like an elaborate ritual. And then the last section is the DM's appendix. Any of the boxes that are shaded are intended for DM's eyes only, and they include game mechanics. And then finally we have the guide to the Vistani. So anybody who has played the 5e Curse of Strahd campaign can tell you about the Vistani. So they're inspired by the Roma and Gypsy people. These days that's considered a bit of a naughty word, and some people may have a problem with how the Vistani are depicted, essentially as stereotypes. But from what I understand of the Ravenloft setting is that this is a setting that is firmly rooted in its gothic horror tropes. And what is the difference between a stereotype and a trope? If you think that the depiction of Vistani is problematic, you're more than valid to feel that way, and don't include them or change them in your game. So my take on this matter is that the creators and the designers are probably more attracted to the allure of a people that might have supernatural powers, and fortune telling, divination, tarot cards, crystal balls. A lot of these esoteric things, that Eastern European type of style really lends itself well to the Ravenloft flavor, which has its roots in Transylvania. I mean, we just looked at the book called The Guide to Transylvania. So this book looks at the Vistani culture and their way of life, why they do the things that they do. It talks about them remaining neutral. It is, I believe, part of their lore that they can move between the different domains, and not even the Dark Lords will want to fuck with them. So the other thing that's a part of the Ravenloft setting is curses. There are actually real game mechanics for curses, and curses are extra effective when it's done by Vistani. We have a sample of Tralax, which is a written language of the Vistani. The next section talks about the different tribes of the Vistani. So surprise, surprise, the Vistani are not all of the same people. So these different tribes have different powers and different specialties. There are actually a numerous number of tribes in this section, and this can really help you from distinguishing between the different Vistani NPCs and make them all feel very unique. And as I alluded to previously, curses and the evil eye. So it goes into the power of the evil eye. There is an adventure module called the Evil Eye, and one of the Dark Lords, Gabrielle, also has the Evil Eye power. I've not read through this section, but I remember in the write-up for Gabrielle, she can use any enchantment spells that she knows through her Evil Eye for free. And then we move on to salient abilities and vulnerabilities. Now, all of the other Van Richten skies were done for monsters and creatures, whereas the Vistani aren't really monsters or creatures that you can fight. They're more likely going to be NPCs that have their own agenda. So this is a section that you could potentially use in making a Vistani an antagonist and make them really memorable. And then towards the end of this book, we have Vistani player character kits. So for the longest time, the Vistani player characters were not allowed. So in this section, it seems like that they have actually decided that if the player's desire to play a Vistani comes from a genuine place, there isn't a good reason for the DM to bar them from playing this race. So the Vistani abilities have been toned down, and the different tribes have different tribal abilities as well. Prior to this, I believe you can play a half Vistani character, and this might be the first time that you're allowed to play a full Vistani, although I might be wrong. And the next book is a Dark Sun supplement called Beyond the Prism Pentad. This book is 32 pages and was released in 1995. And I'm very excited about this book because this is the last Dark Sun book that I was missing. And with this, I now have a full complete Dark Sun collection. If you watched my previous unboxing videos on Dark Sun products, you may remember me talking about the Prism Pentad series. The Prism Pentad were 5 novels that were written by Troy Denning, and it's the official meta story of the Dark Sun setting. So what happened with the Dark Sun was that they released the original campaign setting box set, and the first novel of the Prism Pentad series called The Verdant Passage was then released, and the adventure module Freedom was to take place simultaneously with the Verdant Passage. And by the end of that novel, one of the Sorcerer Kings were killed in canon. And as this novel series went on, they ended up killing other major characters and changed the setting so dramatically that the state of the world that was established in the campaign setting box set was made obsolete. So the Prism Pentad series happened over a period of 10 years within the game world, and we have some of the prominent characters that were featured in the novel. So there's Riker's Amul, also known as a half-dwarf gladiator. He's more or less the main character of the novels. Neva is his gladiatorial fighting partner. And then we have Sidira, who is a half-elven wizard. Argus of Asticles, who's also my favorite character in the novels, doesn't make an appearance here. So I've only read the first book to completion, and by read I mean the audiobook, and I was about halfway through the second book before I got bored. So I know a little bit about what happened in the books. And we're given a 10-year timeline, and all of the Dark Sun products that were released, as well as the Prism Pentad novels, have been plotted on this timeline to give you a continuity on exactly when and what happened, just in case you want to follow the canon and the timeline of the meta storyline. So it talks about the major events that happened in those 10 years and what ramifications and implications that these changes have made to the rest of the world. What happened to the different city-states in those 10 years, and gives you a bit of an update to the state of the world and what's happened in the different city-states, so you can draw on that as inspiration to build future storylines. So towards the end of the book, we have stat blocks for the different NPCs that you met in the novels. For example, Riker's Sidira. So in the 10 years of adventures, Riker's is now level 15 and Sidira is level 18. And then we have stat blocks for some of the Sorcerer Kings and Queens. Something that's really interesting here though, in 1995, Dark Sun released a revised campaign setting box set, which is supposed to update the lore based on the changes that happened since the Prism Pentad novels. So I don't know if this book is released before or after the revised campaign setting. So it still uses the original Dark Sun logo. The revised books have a different logo. So that makes me think that this book was released before, as in we're going to release a book and tell you about all of the updates, and then we're going to release a new box set that's going to introduce other cool things for the years to come. And in the revised box set, they started converting all of the stats over to the player's options version. So the Dark Sun setting has psionics baked in. Everybody in Dark Sun has at least some level of psionic talents. I recently done a video where I explained how psionics worked in 2nd edition, which I'll link over here for you. But with the release of the player's options books, the revised Dark Sun setting converted all of the NPCs and all of the creatures over to the player's options version of the psionic mechanics, which includes an M-Thaco or mental 2-hit AC 0. And then there is also mental AC. So the idea is that they converted the psionic combat over to the same format as a physical attack roll, where you have an attack roll and an armor class, to make psionics a bit more streamlined. So it seemed like the designers of this product had enough forethought to future-proof the content in this book, which is really interesting to see. And then in the last section, we have an adventure called the Defiler's Gambit. This is only 5 pages long, and it's designed for 4 to 6 players between 7th and 12th level. But I'm sure any eager DM will be able to expand on this and incorporate that into their game if this is an adventure that you want to run, because it includes some of the characters from the novels. Next up, we have the Shackled City. So this book is labeled Dungeons and Dragons using the 3rd edition logo, and it says Dungeon Adventure Path. So this book is quite rare and usually fetches a pretty penny. And on the back, we can see that we've got Wizards of the Coast as well as Paizo. So how did this adventure came about? TSR and later on Wizards of the Coast used to have 2 magazines. One is called Dragon and one is called Dungeon. So Dragon magazine is the one where they would publish a lot of articles on rules, lore, new magic, new items, new classes, new mechanics, essentially everything that's on the game side. And we also had Dungeon Magazine, which was like a monthly publication of adventure modules which came in the magazine form. The Shackled City was an adventure path, and back in the mid-2000s, Paizo, who now makes Pathfinder, were the publisher of the Dungeon and the Dragon magazines. And during this time they released, I think it was 12 parts in this adventure that we would now call Adventure Path, and it was published in the Dungeon magazine. So this book collates all of the adventures in this adventure path that were published, put them all in this hardcover book, and as far as I know, the adventure was also cleaned up a little bit. And the back of the book says that there was a new adventure that was included in this book, and it was written by Chris Perkins. So let's have a look. So it comes with a poster map that is literally stuck onto the cover. I don't want to remove it as I don't want to damage it in any way. So I'll just show you guys a brief glimpse of the map. So this is a map of the city, probably the Shackled City. So this book is absolutely massive. It's over 400 pages. It was released in 2005. This feels like a Paizo book, and I say that because of the size. So I don't know too much about this adventure, but given this was written for 3rd edition, it seems like this adventure would be quite crunchy because 3E was very crunchy. And I seem to have read that there's quite a lot of combat, which is not really surprising given Paizo wrote it. So reading the blurb that's on the back of the book, this city is called Cauldron, and it's built into the inside of a dormant volcano, so that sounds pretty cool. The other thing that I know about this adventure is that it does actually take place among the planes. I mean, I'm a Planescape fan. If you say the magic word, which is planes, I'm automatically interested. And here we are, a picture of the city itself. So the poster map is a large version of this. So how I heard about this adventure came down to the fact that I am a massive Planescape fan. There is a Planescape blog that I follow is called A Walk Through the Planes, and the author is also a big Planescape fan, and the entire blog is the author going through all of the Planar related content, whether it be supplements, campaign settings, adventures, and by officially published, it unfortunately also includes Dragon and Dungeon magazines. I'm going to link the blog in the description of this video. If you're a big Planescape fan like I am, go check it out. Do be warned though, it is very, very long. So because the Shackled City was originally published in Dungeon magazine, and it has Planar content, the author of this blog published an entry for this campaign, and to be honest, I remember reading it. However, I wasn't really engaged with the content of that blog, and I kind of just drifted off. I seem to recall that he did actually say that there was quite a lot of combat in this, but there is one part of the blog that I did remember, and it was him saying, if you could get your hands on this book, you should check it out, or something along those lines. And there's another D&D YouTuber that I follow by the name of DravenSwiftbow, and I'm pretty sure he has done a series of videos on this adventure. So I'm going to go and find that link and also post it in the comment of this video, as I'm obviously doing a terrible job at summarizing this adventure for y'all. So go check out his video if you're interested in learning more about this adventure. So the back of the book mentions the Abyss. So clearly that's going to be a part of this campaign. And we have good old Marilith once again. So now that the demons are appearing, you know that this adventure is going to be set in the Abyss. So Asylum is chapter 12, which is also the final chapter of this adventure. The average party level should be 19. And apparently I was wrong because the players are actually traveling to Kasiri, which is the plane that's next to the Abyss. I'm intrigued because I find Kasiri intriguing. So one of these days I'm going to have to read through this book and see what all the fuss is about, and maybe run it in another system. I don't particularly want to run 3rd or any derivation of 3rd, to be honest. It's just too crunchy for me. And I would also try to scale down on the combat as well. So towards the end of the book, we have some new monsters and some new magic items, prestige classes. And then there are monster stats. But there are no artwork for any of these, because I think that these stats are just pulled from the various monster manuals that's already released. It's just here for completeness sake. And then NPC stats. And a few more maps towards the end. These dotted lines make me nervous because it implies that the intention would be for you to cut them out, because on one side you have what appears to be riddles and on the opposite side are the solutions. So I'm really worried that some teenagers would have actually cut up their book. And then a detachable map booklet at the end. Let's go through the books in this bundle one by one. The first item that we have is the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition Dungeon Master Screen. So this was released in 1989 along with the launch of the 2nd Edition core books, and it also came with a short adventure called Terrible Trouble at Tragidore. So let's open this up. Now, if you started playing D&D with 5th edition, this Dungeon Master Screen is not going to be what you're used to. So obviously all of the tables and references relates to 2nd edition, but you can also see that this is made out of extremely flimsy cardboard. If you've seen any of my other unboxing videos, I would have shown off some of the 2nd edition campaign setting box sets, and most of them came with a Dungeon Master Screen that's made out of a similar cardstock to this. The other difference is that this screen has 3 panels, whereas the subsequent Dungeon Master Screens for the campaign settings came in 4 panels, so it was wider by 1 additional panel. So the information that's contained on the inside, we have the Theckel table, which stands for 2-hit AC 0. We have the saving throws table, the morale table with base and modifiers. So in 2nd edition combat, under certain conditions, typically the DM will call for a morale check for the monsters, and if they fail a morale check, they may decide to run away or surrender. Cover and concealment modifier, situational combat modifiers, visibility ranges, toning undead tables, the average thieving ability tables. This is typically used for NPCs, whereas a player playing a thief character can train in the skill of their choosing. We have an encounter reaction roll in 2E. This is where your charisma modifier will come in. Armor class ratings, initiative modifiers, surprise modifiers, encounter distance, the different types of weapon and their damage, and also a speed factor. And we also have missile weapons on the sidebar. And one additional difference with missile weapons is the ROF rate of fire, as some missile weapons can be fired multiple times per round. And we have one more panel on this side, which is the player facing side, and the players can also refer to this for their benefit. We have missile weapons, Theckel turning undead tables, combat modifiers, but there is a unique table on this side, which is the unarmed attack table. In 2nd edition, when you choose to do an unarmed attack, the type of unarmed attack that you do is actually determined by your roll. So if you get a 14, it's an uppercut. If you get a 6, that's a jab. And it does a set amount of damage, but it also has a percentage of an instant KO. And it's the same kind of idea if you want to wrestle. In later editions, this will be called a grapple. And the other player-facing panels include the item saving throws table, cover and initiative modifiers. I'm a little bit baffled on why the item saving throws table is facing the players, as this contains information that should only be available to the DMs. Now let's take a look at the adventure. So this adventure is 16 pages and it's called Terrible Trouble at Tragidore. It's an adventure for between 4 to 6 players of level 5 to 8. So it's explained in the blurb, this version of the adventure is adapted and condensed from an RPGA tournament module, and it's essentially more or less a demo adventure for 2nd edition, as it was launched at the same time as the 2nd edition books. So this adventure starts in a town called Hanuman, and it starts with an NPC putting up a help wanted sign, encouraging the players to investigate. So there is a neighboring town called Tragidore, and a couple of months ago the regular lumber shipment from Tragidore to Hanuman tapered off and eventually stopped. And since then, everybody who has went to Tragidore to investigate have not returned. So now it seems like the player characters are offered that same job and they need to go to Tragidore to investigate. So I heard that this module is not very good, and acts more or less like an additional incentive for the DMs to pick up the DM screen, as they're getting an adventure for free. And really this adventure didn't actually cost them anything because it was already a tournament module. They just had to edit it down and clean it up a little bit so it can be used for players at home. Regardless of how good or bad this adventure is, I am happy to add this to my collection. Next up is the Spelljammer Monstrous Compendium. This was released in 1990, the same year as the Spelljammer campaign setting box set. So there were 2 Monstrous Compendiums released for Spelljammer. This is MC7 released in 1990, and there was another one that is MC9 released in 1991. Both of these are just called Monstrous Compendium Spelljammer Appendix, and the only thing that's different is the cover art and the product code. So this set is still sealed, so I won't break the seal. However, here is what I prepared earlier. So I already have a set of this Monstrous Compendium. It came with one of the used ring binders that I bought, which included a few of the Monstrous Compendiums. However, it is not complete, it's missing the cover. And each set of Monstrous Compendiums came with 4 fully colored dividers. I mentioned in one of my earlier videos that when 2nd edition was launched, the Monstrous Compendium was released in a ring binder format. And it came in a ring binder like this. So you would open it up, and the monster entries are sorted in alphabetical order. And there are additional space within the ring binder that you can add more pages to. You can see that this one has a Forgotten Realms one that's been added. These loose leaf pages are also alphabetically ordered. So the idea is that if you wanted to, you can actually file this one under C and combine it with the original content. And they're printed on both sides. And each of these additional appendix that you get are typically 32 pages. But one of the big cons is that if you're going to be using these pages a lot, you're going to be constantly flipping through them. You're going to get a lot of wear and tear where the holes are, and some of these pages will end up being damaged. So in 1995, when they revised the 2nd edition books, the Monstrous manual was re-released in a hardcover format, which is much more sensible. But I've taken out the Spelljammer section so I can show you without breaking the seal on this product, as that's going to go into my collection. So the Spelljammer campaign setting was released in 1989 and is marketed like D&D in space, but not sci-fi space like Star Wars. This is more of a fantasy space. And hence the spaceships, which are called Spelljamers, typically have more of a fantasy take, like the ship with the dragon head and the oars that's just casually sailing through space. Some of the classic D&D monsters like the Beholder got a bit of a remix in Spelljammer. They're similar to their cousins in regular D&D, but in Spelljammer they would actually take on a different kind of role. And they don't tend to be as monstrous in Spelljammer as they are in a standard D&D setting. A lot of these artwork have a kind of retro 1950s, 60s, spacey sci-fi kind of style to them. I don't know if you guys remember, there used to be an old TV show called Lost in Space, and it's kind of giving me that. And here we have a giant space hamster. And we know that Boo, the partner of Minsk from Baldur's Gate, is allegedly a miniature space hamster. So the word that I generally use to describe the Spelljammer setting, at least what it was in 2nd edition, is camp. Because it's kind of irreverent but also larger than life. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but on the other hand, everybody is totally serious about it. It's got this kind of everybody's in on the joke kind of vibe. For me, I feel like it's really difficult to nail down the tone of the setting, because I feel like it's treading a very fine line and it can very easily be seen as a bit of a joke. I guess that's okay if you want to just have a laugh with the boys or girls or whoever that you're playing with, but I prefer my D&D games to be a bit more serious. The next book is the D&D 3.5 supplement called Planar Handbook. As I mentioned previously, I am a big Planescape fan, so anytime I see any Planar material, I automatically want the book. So during 3rd edition, Planescape was cancelled, and a lot of the Planar content would just fold it into the regular 3.x setting. And the 3.x edition has released several Planar-related splat books, and as I understand that this book is mostly about player options. We have the Planescape races being reintroduced back into 3rd edition. We have the Aasimar, and a Planescape favorite, the Barrior. The fact that they have not put them in 5th edition is criminal. So it introduces Mephlings, which are like humanoid races that's mixed with an elemental method. So they're essentially the not Genasi. So here's something interesting. We have the Spikers, which is this, and it says here Spikers are of the same general ancestry as Bladelings. So Bladelings are a race of humanoid creatures from the outer plane of Acheron, and they have blades protruding from their skin like this. But it seems like at this point Bladelings are still not playable, and it's still relegated to the monster manual. I think at some point that the Bladelings do become available. And then under the powerful races section, we actually have some really cool outer planar creatures being playable. We have the Arvoral Gardenal. So Gardenal are the race of celestials hailing from the neutral good plane of Elysium. And all the Gardenals have an animal feature, kind of like an animal humanoid hybrid. And the Arvoral is half human, half bird, kind of like this. And then we have the Chain Devil, also known as Chitons. And the illustration is the figure on the left. In my opinion, that's an extremely subtle Chiton, because usually they're covered head to toe with only maybe their face being uncovered. So they come from the third layer of the Nine Hells of Beator, and their race specializes in making chains and torture. And then we have the Hound Archon from Mount Celestia, which is the guy on the right here. I love using Hound Archons in my games. My players call them Anubis because they have a canine head on a human body. And then the Jani, which I believe is of a Jinn descent. And then the Lalend, which is the singular term, and the plural term of that is Lalendi. And they are depicted as the winged snake women, and they're from the outer plane of Isgard. They value creativity above everything else, and each one of them have a unique mask they tend to wear at all time. The artwork in this book pales in comparison to Planescape, of course. Chapter 2 goes into classes and feats. So it gives new feats on existing 3.x classes. And chapter 3 are prestige classes. Now what is interesting about these classes, that these prestige classes are the factions of Sigil. So we have the Aether, who are similar to the Agnostics or an Atheist, who have Doom Guards that believe in entropy and the death of the multiverse. The Fated, also known as the Takers, they believe in if you want anything, you need to go out and just take it for yourself. There's a post-faction war, which was an event at the end of the Planescape line, and it made some changes to the faction, so therefore we have the Mind's Eye, which was the result of two factions being merged together. And then we also have the Society of Sensation, also known as the Sensates, who believes that you need to experience the multiverse with your 5 senses. The Transcendent Order, also known as the Ciphers, they believe in action without thought. And the Chaositechs, also known as the Chaosmen, they believe that chaos is the only truth. So if you're unfamiliar with prestige classes, there are special classes that you can only take levels in them once you have met the prerequisite. For example, the Astral Dancer, which is not a faction, by the way, the requirement is 8 ranks of balance, 8 ranks of jump, and 8 ranks of tumble. And you need to have taken the feats Dodge, Mobility, and Spring Attack. Once you have met the prerequisite, then you are allowed to take levels in this prestige class. And then we move on to equipment and magic items. We've got some illustration for some new weapons. The Gehenna Lancet looks really cool. And some more miscellaneous items. I like the Differential Hourglass. And then we also get some new spells, including Planar Domains. These are new domains for clerics, and it seems to align with a certain outer plane, but not all the planes are presented here. And then some new spells. And then we move on to new monsters. The Astral Kraken looks nasty. There's a Darkulus, looks like some kind of an eldritch horror. There is the Elsewhale, where you can travel in its mouth with a giant air bubble. And if you want to travel to the energy planes and you complain that there's nothing worthwhile to fight there, previously we had the Zag-Ya and Zag-Yi, which are creatures of positive and negative energy planes, introduces the Zak-Yul and Zak-Yij, which just looks like balls of light with tentacles. Not necessarily interesting or exciting, but hey, I'm always going to be for populating the energy planes with something. These new monsters are actually quite cool. Too bad that I have no desire to play 3rd edition. I would love it if these creatures were converted back to 2nd edition. This is a model of the Great Wheel cosmology, which was the cosmology used in 2nd as well as 5th edition. However, this is noteworthy because in 3rd edition they actually used the World Tree cosmology, which is quite different. So the fact that they're even acknowledging the Great Wheel cosmology seems to be saying to the players, hey, if you don't like the World Tree cosmology, you can go back to the Great Wheel, we support you. So the first site is the City of Brass, located on the elemental plane of fire. I've done an unboxing video several months ago for an Alcadine product that was called, I think, Secrets of the Lamp, which took place in the City of Brass, and there was a large poster map, and it looks really familiar to this map. And then we have Sigil, the City of Doors, The city was situated on the inside of a giant torus. Think of it like the inside of a car wheel. Here we go, there's a diagram. And then we have Tunarath, which is the largest Githyanki city in the astral plane. If you play Baldur's Gate 3, you would have heard Lae'zel go, in Tunarath we had this, in Tunarath we had that about 1,000,000 times. Some new ideas with planar breaches and planar touchstones. So for Planescape veterans, this is going to be a lot of regurgitated information. It's just information that's now been converted into 3.5. But I think making some of these outer planar creatures playable races is super cool. I would absolutely love to play a Hound Archon. It almost makes me want to play 3.5. Almost. Since we're moving through the editions, we might as well visit 4th edition. I have the 4th edition supplement called Arcane Power. So this book was released in 2009 and is designed to be an expansion to the arcane powered classes, which are Bards, Sorcerers, Sword Mages, which is a new class, Warlocks, and Wizards. So if you see my previous videos, I've talked about not being the biggest fan of 4th edition. I mean, not liking 4th edition, what a groundbreaking opinion, right? So this book sets out to expand the powers for the classes that have their powers derived from the arcane power source. So we have some new spells and new abilities, and there are also new paragon paths, which is a little bit like subclasses for high levels. Or if you're a video gamer, it could also be something like promoting your classes in Fire Emblem. Sword Mage is a new class introduced in this book for 4th edition. So they are an arcane spellcaster, but they also fight with a sword. They're a little bit like a Blade Singer. Some people might think that Blade Singer is a 5th edition thing, but they've existed at least as far back as the 2nd edition. And then we have everybody's favorite class, the Warlock. I may or may not have played a Warlock in 4th edition. I couldn't actually even remember the class that I was given. I just remember I played a charisma-based spellcaster. A lot of the classes played very similarly in 4th edition. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it didn't really leave any lasting impression on me. And then there is the Wizard. So this is the section where it introduces some new feats, familiars, and epic destinies, which are a little bit like specializations at epic levels, meaning level 21. For example, the Archlich, Phalege, Lord of Fate, Sage of Ages, and then we have some new magic items, including magical tomes, and then new rituals, which are essentially just utility spells. And most of these are ported from previous editions anyway, as most of the abilities that you get in 4th edition are combat related. So there tend to be very few utility based powers in 4th. The fact that they're even introducing Purify Water and Unseen Servant as new rituals is a bit of a laugh. And keeping on the 4th edition theme, we have Martial Power, which is the 4th edition supplement for fighters, rangers, rogues, and warlords. And this book was released in 2008. Of all of the splat books called X Power, this one seems to be the first one released. So of all of the power books, there was Martial Power, Divine Power, Arcane Power, Primal Power, Psionic Power, and then the last one released is called Martial Power 2. So that's the only book of that type that I do not own yet. So the fighters also gets Paragon Paths, including the Dwarven Defender, which was a prestige class in 3rd. And then it goes on to Rangers. And Rangers has some new Beast Companion options. The Paragon Path Horizon Walker, which I believe is a Ranger subclass in 5th edition. And then Warlords. Warlord was a new class introduced in 4th edition, and it was one of the base classes available in the original PHB. And some of their abilities do battlefield manipulation. And they can give buffs to your allies, because their thing is that they're supposed to be an inspiring leader. They're more of a martial version of the Paladin, whereas the 4th edition Paladin class uses divine powers. And then the same kind of thing, we move into player options, new feats, new epic destinies, And then that's it. No rituals because martial power characters don't get much utility. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If there's anything else you'd like me to cover, let me know down in the comments. Remember to like and subscribe, and hope we get to hang out again in my next video.